too. I'm Bill Fitzhugh, and I came to the Smithsonian almost at the time of, who was our founder? Was James? That's what they're telling me now, you know, every time I have a birthday. But I did come in the ancient days in 1970, and I was hired by the inestimable Clifford Evans, of whom we could tell many stories. But yeah, Cliff got me out of my stall at the Peabody Museum at Harvard, and I came down here. And after 5 years of doing sort of scientific work and trying to get my thesis published and all that stuff, Porter Keir said, "We want you to be chairman of anthropology after Cliff Evans retires." You know, and Cliff had kind of divided the department a little bit, and so I agreed to do this, and I should never have done it because I had only been there 5 years. So I ended up being in charge of this department, and one of my problems was to sort of arbitrate disputes between Jean Kennez and Chang-su Houchins. If there was ever a pair, I'm really interested in Bob's comments about Jean, because I didn't know Jean's history before he came to the Smithsonian. But when he did come here, it was pretty obvious to me that the relationship between Chang-su and Jean Kennez should have been reversed. Jean should have been working for Chang-su. Yes. And in fact, she produced a lot of the work that Jean took credit for, and so on, of which she did beautifully and without any comment, you know. And it was only those of us who knew what was going on who didn't think this was right, and you know, this was the 1970s, and right was supposed to be right in those days. So, but you know, it went on, and the next time that I really got to know Chang-su a little bit was through her husband, and I think it was when I was also chairman, and Lee Houchins came to me, and he said, "There's this Japanese mountain climber named Uemura who would like to have a relationship with the Smithsonian." And I said, "Well, why?" "Well, because of the Smithsonian's history and exploration and all this." And so I asked what Uemura was known for, and he said, "Well, mountain climbing." And so he wanted, Lee wanted us to provide equipment to Uemura, and to actually, this was the early days of the sort of satellite transponder. And so what we arranged, and this was sort of working through the castle, was to have this mountain climber given a satellite beacon so that his progress up the mountains could be, I think it was Everest at that time, could be monitored. And he did make that ascent, and we got him the equipment, and it worked out. But it gave me a connection to Chang-su through Lee. And some years later, Uemura died in trying to climb Mount Denali, just on a lark on a weekend. It was a really sad, tragic kind of event. And the third episode was when I ended up, quite surprisingly, an Asian scholar, which I had never been known as before. But I had done this exhibit on Crossroads of Continents with the Russians, and one country that had been left out of this was Japan, and one people that was left out of this North Pacific sweep of peoples were the Ainu. So Japanese anthropologist Vic Kotani came to me, and he was doing this global inventory of Ainu material culture in museums around the world, and very interested in our Ainu collection, because we had Roman Hitchcock collection, which was one of the very first and very best documented collections from Hokkaido Ainu and Kuril Ainu. And we had these great archival photographs, and the Japanese scholars had been coming to us to look at these collections for some years. So I agreed to do this exhibit, and I was sort of talking to Chang-su off and on as we started this process. And she was, you know, very willing to help. And she said, "By the way, I have this manuscript on the Hitchcock collection, and I'd be happy to provide it so that you could use the information. We needed to have a profile of Hitchcock in our book for the Smithsonian's collection history of Ainu, along with many other collections." So she generously provided that and wrote a piece about it. But so I saw the manuscript. It was like 100 pages of detailed documentation. I said, Chang-su, let's publish this manuscript, along with the show. And she says, well, I have this colleague in Japan named Otsuka, and I have provided him with this manuscript as a kind of an arrangement, and I was going to do the detailed documentation. He was going to put it in the larger historical context, and we would publish it, jointly. The problem was Otsuka was well known in Japan as a non-starter, and a guy who was kind of like a sinkhole of information. So we did our project. We produced the Ainu show, and Chang-su was wonderful. It helped us. I had a young Ainu lady, Chisato Dubre, who came to work with us. And in fact, when we had Chisato, we also had her husband, David. The two go together. And he was American Indian, and she was part Ainu, and he had been shot up in Vietnam, ended up in a hospital with a bullet through his neck, recovering, and always wore a brace and sweat suits, complete. So we'd arrange these meetings with T.C. Benson and all of the Nippon Society people, these bigwigs, and David would show up looking like he just got out of the gym, with his head like this.
And a beard.
And a beard. And halfway through the interview, he would break out into sweat because his his thermal system was just shot up, so they were quite a pair. And the problem was that the Japanese never accepted Chang-su because she was Ainu. These were Japanese, real Japanese scholars who thought the Ainu, no matter what period, age, Kitty, were not qualified to be doing exhibits and to be doing scholarly work. I mean, Kitty was not a PhD, all this time. And we said, look, this is not about PhDs, this is about community scholars, it's about knowledge, it's about getting the Ainu involved in these collections. So we had a terrible time with our Japanese colleagues. But Kitty managed to bull through it, and Chang-su was behind us all the time, sort of, keeping the starch in Kitty's back so that she could, confront these pretty nasty people once in a while. The end result was that, after we did the show, I kept going back to Chang-su every couple of years. Said, Chang-su, how's your manuscript of Otsuka? And I knew what the result would be. It was going nowhere. And eventually, it just kind of became a subject that we didn't talk about anymore. And of course, I was urging her to confront him. To let's get your manuscript back. We can do this. Maybe we still can, but it was a very similar story to what Bob has mentioned. She was an elegant woman who was, outclassing just about everybody she was working with, and she was not fully appreciated in the museum or by the administration. I'm sure she was not fully appreciated by by the people who benefited from her scholarship. Paul, I think, came along and really helped tremendously, gave her a role, and she published a lot of her work that way, and I'm really pleased that happened because, up until that point, she was the example of the civil servant who had this unbelievable history and background, but who came to nothing in the government, So Paul really resurrected her, and I always loved to meet her, talk to her. I met her daughter when
beautiful daughter.
She was so proud of her daughter.
She was so proud of her daughter.
Yeah.
She dragged me aside and said, "Now I want you to meet my daughter."
Yeah.
And it was like I was 21.
Yeah. And it was like, oh, Bill. Yeah.
That's the way I felt about it. I felt she was introducing me to her daughter as She was a wonderful lady.
Gorgeous, beautiful.
And I guess the most sorrowful thing is that during the last year and a half as she was sick, that I never did see her, and I never got a chance to talk to her, one more time, because that was what I wanted to do. And I always thought, well, I'll come back and we'll find out what to do about Otsuka. Thank you.